What happens when the very concept of profit becomes the bottleneck to civilization? That question matters more than most people realize because we are already moving into a world where the old logic of capitalism makes less and less sense. Mark Fisher wrote about capitalist realism in 2009. That feeling that there is no alternative, that capitalism is simply the horizon of thought and the permanent state of modern life. Post capitalist realism begins where that spell starts to break. It begins when the system stops looking inevitable because its basic math no longer matches material reality. Start with zero marginal cost. In simple terms, this is what happens when producing one more unit of something costs almost nothing. You build the system once, and after that, the output keeps coming without the old relationship between labor, cost, and price. A digital file can be copied endlessly. A solar panel keeps generating energy after installation. A fully automated production line does not need the same human input for every additional output. The closer production gets to that condition, the weaker the old justification for price becomes. Now, add automated infrastructure. Factories need fewer workers to operate. Automated warehouses organize themselves. Software handles coordination once done by layers of clerical labor. Energy systems require less ongoing human effort. Fabrication technologies reduce the distance between design and production. Homes, grids, and machines increasingly diagnose, maintain, and adjust themselves. This is the direction modern technology has been moving for a long time. As that process continues, profit starts changing its character. Earlier in industrial history, profit could still present itself as part of expansion. It could claim to coordinate risk, mobilize capital, and build productive capacity. But once systems can produce abundance at extremely low marginal cost, profit starts acting more like a drag on efficiency. It makes capitalism increasingly look more like just a toll charged on systems that could already serve people directly than the engine of progress it pretends to be. That is the point where post-capitalist realism sets in. The problem is no longer a lack of technical capacity. The problem is that ownership still stands between people and what technology already makes possible. If a society can generate clean energy at very low ongoing cost, then permanent rent extraction on access to that energy starts looking less like economics and more like organized obstruction. If automation can reduce toil dramatically, forcing people to stay trapped in labor just to preserve the wage relation starts looking irrational. The more productive power expands, the clearer the contradiction becomes. This is where capitalism shows its limits. It cannot live comfortably with abundance. It needs scarcity, or at least the managed appearance of scarcity, because price, profit, and leverage all depend on it. So when real scarcity starts weakening, the system rebuilds scarcity socially. It does it through intellectual property, licensing, subscriptions, platform lock-in, and rentier claims on housing, land, software, medicine, data, and infrastructure. The purpose of the system stays the same. Keep access conditional, keep people paying, keep dependence intact. That is why making things more affordable is no longer enough as a horizon. Affordable still means permission and leaves the underlying problem untouched. Once the cost of producing many necessities drops far enough, the real question stops being how cheap something can get and becomes whether it should still be priced at all. That is a bigger shift than most political language is prepared to admit. The center of gravity moves from price to access. The test of a system becomes whether people can actually use the productive powers of their society. Profit starts looking less like a reward for efficiency and more like a tax imposed between human beings and the means of living well. This is also why I connect the argument to Enlightenment socialism. If the Enlightenment meant anything, it meant that human beings are ends in themselves rather than raw material for someone else's accumulation. If technology now allows more of life to be secured with less toil, less cost, and less scarcity, then a society committed to liberty has an obligation to translate that gain into freedom, shorter work weeks, wider access, less dependence, more time, and the means to develop as a person. Capitalism cannot complete that translation because it is built to do something else. It is built to preserve profitable control over the means of access. Even when production advances, it keeps asking the same questions. How do we keep charging for this? How do we keep ownership central? How do we keep people dependent on the market for what they need? Post-capitalist realism begins when those questions start sounding backward. It begins when more and more people recognize that the bottleneck is no longer nature, labor, or technical capacity. The bottleneck is the social system insisting on profit where profit no longer serves any civilizational purpose. That is why this matters. The future turns on whether the gains of technology are socialized or fenced off. It turns on whether abundance reduces coercion or whether artificial scarcity is rebuilt to keep the old power structure alive. That is the conflict underneath a great deal of contemporary life. Capitalism is not the final form of economic life. It is a historical system that starts looking increasingly irrational once productive power outruns scarcity. At that point, the real question is how long we keep pretending profit isn't parasitism.